Greetings, everyone. My name is Langston Clark. It's my honor to be here today to provide you with the annual Sargent Lecture for the this year's NACI meeting. The lecture is titled "Dare the Disciplines to Build a New Academy: The Future of Kinesiology and Health in Higher Education." The lecture will be split into two different parts. First, we have the DARE part, which is what we're going to start off with, and then we'll talk about our future later on in the presentation. I want to begin first by acknowledging my creator, my ancestors, and my family. If not for the sacrifices of those who came before me, I would not be here today. Furthermore, I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge my academic families of fellow Pete scholars, the number of classmates and professors, students, and mentors I've met in North Carolina A&T, The Ohio State, the University of Texas at Austin, the University of Texas at San Antonio, and in professional organizations like NACI. As we move into the next era of higher education, we must all acknowledge our need for a thriving community of scholars and scientists who are supportive of one another beyond the confines of our academic work. I have to also give special acknowledgement to Dr. Darla Castelli, who laid the practical foundation that inspired much of this content that I'm going to be presenting here today in this lecture. I will never forget one day in class during my first or second year in the doctoral program at UT Austin, when she challenged the class to think about what it meant to be Pete scholars with an impact that extends beyond our field. We would have conversations that included educational policy, pedagogy, neuroscience, architecture, and so much more. Darla Castelli is an outstanding scientist, but an even better teacher. Her challenge to us was to bring physical education, teacher education into the mainstream. And I think that extends broadly for all of our entire family of disciplines within kinesiology and higher education. The rise of a global pandemic, the repeated imagery of racial violence televised and on social media news feeds brings to reality the cliched theme 2020 vision. This was meant to be used for the edification of a new decade. The advent of the next 10 years was thought to begin with clarity for a bright new future. Despite being bitter and blurry, 2020 removed all excuses for us not to see or acknowledge the elephants in the room. According to NYU business professor Scott Galloway, the coronavirus has become more than a great revealer, it is also the great accelerator. The infusion of new technologies in every facet of society has prompted a shift away from the status quo that is unprecedented even in higher education. This comes at a time when, even before the global pandemic, the national narrative around higher education began to question the value of going to college while accruing student loan debt that would hamper the economic future of the next generation of the United States workforce. The most recent elections were filled with promises of free college and student loan forgiveness, in what is perhaps an attempt to salvage the waning economic credibility of higher education. This is no doubt a reaction to numerous states' lack of investment in higher education. Between 2008 and 2018, the cost of tuition in the United States grew by 37%. Despite these economic changes, not much has changed in the way academics provide an education to students of all class, gender, racial, ethnic, sexual orientations, and other identities. And higher education is meant to encourage citizens to question and think deeply about the world around them, yet we take advantage of the credulous optimism of students who believe that we are committed to providing an exceptional education. Many of us in the academy who relied on antiquated approaches to teaching have been exposed as digital foreigners. Unaccustomed to the modern pedagogical approaches that leverage technology, unlike some of our students, we cannot use the digital divide as an excuse. Learning technologies like Blackboard, Canvas, and others have been around for more than 20 years. Our lack of care to fully develop our teaching skills so that we can use these programs to their capacity has likely contributed to the digital divide. As I begin my 6th year as a professor who not only trains primarily Brown, Latinx, Black, and Black physical educators, but also researches and writes about programs that have historically committed themselves to doing the same, I find myself existentially perplexed, convinced that the academy is subtly anti-student, anti-education, and anti-community. Most of us have been raised in an academic culture that tells us during our pre-tenure years that we should not limit ourselves to mentoring and teaching and to just focus on the research. We are imprinted with the slogan, publish or perish. As a physical education teacher-educator at a Hispanic serving institution that serves mostly first generation and transfer students, I believe that this approach to higher education exploits students, their families, and communities who expect our best efforts as faculty members committed to teaching. The truth is that students are not going into debt tens of thousands of dollars so that faculty members can do research. They're not going into debt so that we can manufacture meaningless administrative positions that have nothing to do with improving the quality of education. A phenomenon David Graeber describes as the bullshitization of academic life. Yes, as a community of scholars and scientists, we have a responsibility to explore and investigate for the creation of new knowledge. Yes, we are deserving of a vocation that rewards and promotes us for our good work, but not at the expense of the work that matters most. Yes, we have a responsibility to be stewards of our disciplines, but we cannot become like zealots who care more about the religion than we do the believers. With this in mind, as a community of academics in the various kinesiology disciplines, where do we go from here? How do we become rebels against the status quo in the next age of higher education, the post-corona era? Influenced by the seminal work of progressive era education scholar Howard Counts' Dare the School to Build a New Social Order, a classic text set within the progressive education movement, I offer a framework meant to dare the disciplines to build a new academy, an academy committed to fashioning a future for kinesiology and higher education that is valuable first to students and society and then to academics. By academy, I'm not talking about a building or a place of learning, but rather a set of ideals, a school of thought leading to praxis that influences substantive change in the epistemological and ontological movements of modern academics and kinesiology. In DARE, Counts proposes that those committed to progressive education should embrace imposition and indoctrination. This flamboyant language may not appeal to some, but it simply means that those who are committed to a progressive style of education should be honest with themselves by accepting the fact that all education is inherently imposing and indoctrinating. For me, this is less about being progressive or conservative, but rather a call to be intentional about our approach to educating. Counts outlines 10 fallacies associated with assumptions made about the nature of education. Of the 10 fallacies, I will adopt or augment 5 in this declaration to build a new academy. The fallacy that education is some pure and mystical essence that remains unchanged from everlasting to everlasting. The fallacy that the great objective of education is to produce the college professor. The closely related fallacy that education is primarily intellectualistic in its processes and goals. The fallacy that school is the all-powerful education agency, when the reality is that school is but one force that shapes children and students. The fallacy that the school should be impartial in its emphasis, that no bias should be given in its instructions. Like counts, most of us recognize that higher education is flawed. It is neither pure nor mystical, but we maneuver such that very few innovations meant to progress higher education or society have manifested from within our ranks. The problem is not that we believe this fallacy, it is that we perpetuate it. The scholarship pertaining to organizational socialization and physical education refers to three roles inhabited by professionals: custodians, those who maintain the status quo; content innovators, those who bring new and fresh ideas to the field; role innovators, those who radically reimagine what it means to be in their professions. The fallout of the coronavirus leaves little room for custodianship as kinesiologists in higher education. The creation of new ideas and knowledge are the lifeblood of the traditional academy. Content innovation is normal in any academic field. Less so is the fearlessness to reimagine who we are as a community of scholars and scientists, and then act in accordance with the reimagining. In our efforts to maintain a healthy, diverse ecosystem of kinesiologists, we should not succumb to the idolatry of the professoriate. It should not be our primary objective to produce college professors, individuals who adopt agnostic attitudes, becoming all theory and no action. Counts' critique of college professors is that we can balance the pros and the cons with the skills of a juggler. We can see all sides of every question and never commit ourselves to any, delaying action until all the facts are in, knowing all the facts will never come in, which leads to the atrophying of our power to act, while obscuring our liminal perspective of those in the margin. As a community of post-corona scholars and scientists, we should see and prepare ourselves to be democratic actors in every facet of society. For those of us working in doctoral programs, if we see an applicant whose objective for doctoral studies is noble but disinterested in an academic career, a rejection of their application is our loss. In addition to preparing academics, it should not be taboo to prepare entrepreneurs, independent scholars, school teachers, those wanting to work in corporate or philanthropic America, and even politics. Note that the 116th Congress of the United States is the most educated, with 72% of the House of Representatives having some type of graduate degree. The pool of individuals disinterested in the academy, but committed to the quest of truth and knowledge, has the potential to be the role innovators who can help lead us into the post-corona era. Similar to the false belief that the purpose of education is to train more professors, is the closely related fallacy that education is primarily intellectualistic in its process and goals. The point here is that the professoriate should not be more concerned with ideas than injustices or other meaningful happenings in society. To make his point, Count states the following: we can see injustice, crime, and misery in its most terrible forms all about us. And if we are not directly affected, register the emotions of a scientist studying white rats in a laboratory, which he described as a morally and spiritually bankrupt approach to education. As a community of scholars and scientists, we must ask ourselves, are we moved by any great faiths? Are we touched by any great passions? Are we deeply committed to solving meaningful problems in the world around us? Or are we only concerned about perpetuating the nature of our own survival? As we dare to build a new academy, kinesiologists must be central in shaping the reconceptualization of all higher education in the post-corona era. We should be leaders in the movement to expand the reach and impact of higher education. A democratic approach and allows for more communities to benefit from higher education and research. And so the reason why I have this emblem up here is because here in San Antonio, I met an outstanding, innovative young man named Alex Bailey, and he is the founder of a nonprofit organization called Black Outside. And I bring Alex up because he saw a need, he saw a divide in the outdoors. And so thinking about, those of us who are interested in outdoor education, thinking about those of us who are interested in how people use their bodies, who move their bodies in authentic situations like being outside, outdoors, hiking, or what have you. This is one example, Camp Founder Girls, which is a part of Black Outside, of how us as scholars and academics can partner with people who saw a problem in society and then created something actionable to go ahead and solve that issue. And so Alex, through Black Outside, through Camp Founder Girls, saw a need, saw a divide in the time that Black children in San Antonio and other places in the country have for their opportunities to experience the outdoors. And he did something with that passion. He built something. And so I would like to use this as an example to encourage us within the Academy to do the same and to partner with people like that. Like Counts, we should also admit that the university is not the all-powerful education agency. The university is but one institution with the capacity to provide a higher education. It is no secret that there is both arrogance and elitism in the Academy. I will never forget, while in graduate school, one of the professors was never shy about saying, "This program is the best in the world." In another graduate program, the college would laud itself for being consistently ranked as one of the best in the US News and World Report's annual rankings. There is nothing wrong with being the best, but once you have become the best, then what? Theologian James P. Carse and more recently, public intellectual Simon Sinek described two types of games: finite games and infinite games. A finite game is played for the purpose of winning. An infinite game for the purpose of continuing to play. Finite games have a standard set of rules, number of players, boundaries, winners and losers, beginning and end. In a finite game, you can be the winner, you can be number one, and you can be the best. But we are not playing a finite game. We are playing an infinite game. There are rules, but they are constantly changing. Doing best is more important than being the best. There is no trustworthy ranking system, and we should not be interested in winning or losing, because once the winner is declared, the game is over. If the coronavirus taught us anything, is that we are playing an infinite game. Lecturers are now on Zoom. Students are living on the other side of the country or world, now no longer have to move. And despite the objections of faculty senates everywhere, budget models will inevitably change. Perhaps now more than ever, higher education will face stiffer competition from non-traditional platforms like Trump University. Just kidding. In all seriousness, we're playing a game where the rules have changed and there are new players. We cannot assume that the offerings of non-traditional higher education from big tech companies will be limited to computer programming and software development. What happens when school districts and charter school organizations, many of whom are now adopting grow your own teacher programs, evolve into full-fledged independent teacher education programs? How does Pete survive? Recognizing that many kinesiologists in higher education have not been trained as teachers and therefore don't provide adequate value for the cost of education, if the for-profit medical industry decides to train their own physiologists, biomechanists, and public health advocates, what then would be the role of kinesiology in higher education? As we dare the disciplines to build a new academy, we must acknowledge that we are playing an infinite game and do what is necessary to continue playing at a level that is efficient and meaningful. With the other fallacies, counts includes the belief that the school should be impartial and its emphasis that no bias should be given in its instruction. The current state of higher education is one moving towards what is thought to be social justice. A cliche among many academics and diversity and inclusion experts is the usage of unconscious bias training to alleviate microaggressions and improve the hiring of diverse faculty. We are molded by a culture, we are molded by the culture for which we are born into. We cannot escape bias. We may not even be able to acknowledge all of them. We are all partial to sets of beliefs and customs imbued to us by our social environments. This call to recognize bias is not rooted in any qualitative fetish that values subjectivity over objectivity, but rather a call for us to frame our approaches to truth finding as quests, perhaps even odysseys, imperfect journeys that are met by challenges, whether they are intended to be subjective or objective. Acknowledgement of our bias should lead us to a greater sense of self-awareness, such that we are able to more effectively work with those who are unlike us. Like any community, there is likely more diversity within our disciplines than between disciplines. Yet we have a common interest in the preservation of our ability to continue playing the infinite game such that it is for the good of our students and society. The future of kinesiology and health in higher education. So far, I have outlined 5 fallacies associated with a typical academic's approach to higher education. Now I would like to take the time to highlight 5 suggestions that can help guide the future of kinesiology and health in higher education. Number 1, we should dare to increase the value of our service to students by committing ourselves to excellence in teaching. We should be the leading community of disciplines in higher education to implement a standard for the training of academics who are master teachers, what I call pedagogic researchers. This could be a combination of course offerings at the master's and doctoral levels, as well as seminars provided to graduate students and early career faculty at conferences. We should reframe research presentations at professional conferences to become research lessons that include 2 types of assessments. One being a teaching assessment of the pedagogic researcher, and the other being an assessment given by the pedagogic researcher to see if the audience, the students, understood the concepts. This would not only make conference attendance more valuable for graduate students and early career scholars, but it would also create more value for undergraduate students who expect to be taught by someone who knows how to teach. If we really want to get transformative, dissertation defenses would judge not only on the quality of the research, but the quality of the candidate's ability to teach the research. And up here, I have a picture of Master Yoda, because as you all know, if anybody's watching The Mandalorian, it's a great show. I know it's tangential, but I just have to say, I love Grogu. And so the thing I like about Grogu and Master Yoda is that more so Master Yoda than Grogu, is that Master Yoda was both great at implementing the Force. He could implement the Force and he could also teach the Force. So I want us to think about ourselves as the Master Yodas of higher education. Number 2, we should dare ourselves to become role innovators. There's a long history of kinesiologists whose work and impact on society have transcended higher education. For example, Leroy T. Walker. Leroy had not only a PhD in biomechanics, but he was also a university professor, university president, the first Black president of Shape America, an Olympic track coach, president of a university, and the first Black president of the United States Olympic Committee, as well as president of the Special Olympics. Edith Livonia Allison, who had a PhD in biomechanics, was a university professor, board member of a university, and also an activist in Durham, North Carolina. I'm not suggesting that we all be transcendent like Doctors Walker and Allison, But the easiest way for us to become role innovators is to embrace both service inside and outside of higher education. You may not be in the position to be on the board of a university, but you can be on the board of a nonprofit. You may not be poised to be president of the United States Olympic Committee, but you could be on your city or town's Parks and Recreation Commission. The wealth of knowledge and expertise that we have can be immediately beneficial to communities around us. We do not have to wait hopelessly for someone else to maybe pick up our obscure journal articles and apply that knowledge usefully. Similar to the last suggestion, we should dare to be citizen scholars. Citizen scholars are scholars and scientists who are less concerned with esoteric pontifications and more concerned with meaningful actions. A small suggestion that could move us in this direction is that we set a new standard for the writing of journal articles, such that after we write the conclusions and discussions, we include a brief commitment to action, where authors briefly outline how they intend to use their knowledge in a way that addresses some significant societal issue, then commit to doing so. Number 4, we should dare to be bold and compassionate in our academic work. By academic work, I'm referring to both teaching and researching. The rise of social media and other communications platforms have the potential to fundamentally change how we operate in higher education. While we may be tired of Zoom and Blackboard Collaborate, they have presented us with a unique opportunity to expand the reach of graduate programs. Imagine a potential PhD student who's currently working as a physical educator in San Antonio, Texas. Along with a coaching stipend, they make between $55,000 and $60,000 a year. There is no good reason for us to ask someone who is potentially first generation middle class to pass up on making that much money for 3 to 5 years to make a nominal stipend as a graduate student, then graduate with a PhD, not making much more money than they did before they got it. All because professors want you sitting in class. Instead, we should be structuring programs so that it is not abnormal for students to keep their day jobs while learning how to conduct and apply research in their current vocations. This would allow for new research opportunities that can be applied in real-world settings. If we dare to be compassionate and not custodial in our approach to graduate education, Zoom, social media, and other technologies can allow us to reproduce ourselves in a way that lessens the financial hampering on the next generation of scholars and scientists. So the reason why I have a Care Bear up here is because, for those of you who know what Care Bears are, I grew up on Care Bears. The reason why I have a Care Bear up here is because we think about Care Bears as these loving cartoon characters who just came in and showered people with love, and were like a little soft. They weren't maybe, hardcore in what they did. But I always tell people, Care Bears had lasers coming out of their chests, okay? These people cared like in a very active, like in a very aggressive way. And so if we can care in an aggressive way, if we can care in an actionable way and bring that approach to how we structure and think about our programs, we can be transformative in how we support our students, many of whom are first generation college students, many of whom are first generation graduate students, many of whom are working to lift their families out of poverty. And we can do some transformative things in ways that maybe other people in the academy haven't committed themselves to doing. So much like we should be the Master Yodas of higher education, we should also be the Care Bears of higher education. We should dare, number 5, we should dare to dare everyone else. Sometimes our biases keep us from building coalitions across diverse communities. The same is true for academics who often work in silos. If we are not effectively working across disciplinary boundaries, we cannot be leaders among academics. This lecture was not meant to be a harsh critique of kinesiologists in higher education. Rather, it is my way of admitting that we are the group of scholars and scientists who can fundamentally change the way we do things in higher ed. We are the coolest kids in the playground. We are the STEM scholars who care about teaching. Shout out to Pete. We are the higher educators who value both the mind and the body. We are special. We are unique. My suggestion here is that before the beginning of the next semester, I dare you to develop 2 actionable ideas that can make you a role innovator, a leader among academics on your campus. Then when the semester begins, act on those ideas. Or if there is some societal issue that troubles you, but may not necessarily enhance your vita, if you work towards solving that problem, I challenge you to maintain a commitment to excellence in teaching, but don't feel bad about taking a 1-year break from writing journal articles that very few people read, to take the time to be an active participant in your community and doing whatever it is that you feel you need to do to make your community a better place. As we look forward to a new year in the academy, let us reflect on 2020 with empathy and compassion for those who suffer tragedies. Also, let us remain hopeful in our ability as a community of kinesiology scholars and scientists who are daring to build an academy fit for the era post-corona. And one last thing before we end, I know that we don't have the opportunity to do a question and answer after this, so I want to dare all of you to continue this conversation with me on Twitter at Langston D. Clark, and we're going to use the hashtag Dare to Discipline. And so my thought here is that among us as a community of scholars, as a community of disciplines within kinesiology, for us to have a dialogue about how we can sort of start to rethink, reframe, and reshape how we do higher education as examples and leaders to other people in other disciplines that maybe have nothing to do with kinesiology. And as we have these conversations about daring the discipline, like, let's invite our colleagues in a different college to be a part of this. Let's invite our colleagues who are maybe some international scholars to be a part of this conversation, such that we can continue to develop ideas and then remain actionable in those ideas. Thank you again for having me. I appreciate this opportunity, and I look forward to building a new and progressive and meaningful academy with all of you here in the near future. Thank you.